The body was discovered at 6:17 on a December morning when the temperature hovered just above freezing and fog rolled thick off Casco Bay. A jogger named Patricia Emmons had taken her usual route through the industrial waterfront district, past the old textile mill that had been converted into artist studios, when she noticed something irregular near the loading dock. At first, she thought it was a pile of discarded clothing. Then she saw the hand. Patricia stopped running. Her breath came in short clouds. She pulled out her phone, fingers shaking as she dialed 911. She did not approach any closer. She had read enough news stories to know better than to disturb a crime scene. The Portland Police Department responded within 8 minutes. 2 patrol officers secured the area with yellow tape while a third took Patricia's statement. She had not touched anything. She had not seen anyone else in the vicinity. She ran this route 5 mornings a week and had never encountered anything like this before. Detective Bryce Kellerman arrived at 6:43, driving his unmarked sedan through streets still mostly empty in the pre-dawn darkness. He was 49 years old, with 22 years on the force, and he had developed certain instincts about crime scenes. As he parked and approached the loading dock, he felt the familiar weight of a case settling onto his shoulders. The body belonged to a man lying on his side near a stack of weathered pallets. He wore dark jeans, a heavy wool jacket, and leather boots. His face was turned away from the loading dock entrance toward the brick wall of the mill building. There was no blood visible, no obvious signs of trauma, no weapon nearby. Kellerman pulled on latex gloves and knelt carefully, studying the scene without touching anything yet. The ground was partially frozen, with patches of ice in the shallow puddles left by yesterday's rain. The loading dock area was concrete, cracked and stained with decades of industrial use. Old tire marks, rust stains, faded paint where loading zones had once been marked. Victim is male, appears to be in his 40s, Kellerman said into his recorder. No immediate cause of death visible. Body positioned on left side, facing south wall. No apparent defensive wounds on visible hand. No signs of struggle in immediate vicinity. He stood and surveyed the wider area. The textile mill loomed 4 stories above him, its brick facade weathered by salt air and New England winters. Small windows punctuated the upper floors, some lit from within where artists were beginning their workdays. The loading dock sat at the rear of the building, accessible from a narrow service alley that connected to the Maine waterfront road 200 feet away. The medical examiner arrived at 7:15. Dr. Patricia Went was efficient and thorough, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She knelt beside the body and began her preliminary examination while Kellerman watched. Body temperature suggests death occurred between midnight and 3 a.m., Dr. Went said. Rigor mortis is present but not complete. Lividity is consistent with this position. No obvious trauma to the head or torso. She gently tilted the victim's head. Petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes, possible asphyxiation. I will know more after the autopsy. Any defensive wounds? None that I can see. Dr. Went examined the man's hands carefully. Nails are clean, no skin under them, no bruising on the knuckles. If he struggled, it was not for long. A crime scene technician named Robert Chen was photographing every angle, his camera shutter clicking steadily. Another technician, Sarah Valdez, was searching the surrounding area for evidence, working in a careful grid pattern. Kellerman walked the perimeter of the loading dock. The area was partially sheltered by an overhang, which had kept some of the ground dry. He noted the cameras mounted on the building corners, their lenses pointed toward the main entrances. The loading dock appeared to be in a blind spot. Detective Sarah Valdez called from near the pallets. She was crouched low, her flashlight beam trained on something small. Kellerman approached. Valdez pointed with a gloved finger at a small metal object lying in the gap between 2 pallets. It appeared to be a washer, the kind used in industrial machinery, but there was something unusual about it. Copper, Valdez said, hand-stamped, look at the pattern. Kellerman leaned closer. The washer was about 2 inches in diameter, made of copper that had developed a greenish patina. Someone had etched a spiral pattern into its surface, thin lines curving outward from the center in a deliberate design. On one edge, barely visible, were stamped numbers, 386. Bag it, Kellerman said. That does not belong here. By 8:30, the body had been identified through the wallet found in the victim's jacket pocket. Marcus Harland, age 42, resident of Unit 312 in the mill building directly above them. Commercial maritime photographer, single, no immediate family listed on his emergency contact card, only a brother's name, Derek Harland. Detective Amara Singh arrived at 8:45, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She was 31, newer to the detective division, with a background in digital forensics that Kellerman had come to value. She carried a laptop case and a field evidence kit. "What do we have?" Singh asked, ducking under the tape. Kellerman briefed her on the scene, the preliminary findings, the victim's identity. Singh listened without interrupting, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. "I want access to his apartment," Singh said. "Phone, computer, any digital devices. If this was not random, there will be a trail." The building superintendent met them in the lobby 20 minutes later. Owen Trace was 55 years old, stocky and graying, with the weathered look of someone who had spent years working outdoors before moving inside. He wore a maintenance uniform and carried a ring of keys that jangled when he walked. "Terrible thing," Trace said, shaking his head. "Marcus was a good tenant, quiet, paid rent on time, never caused any problems." "How long had he lived here?" Kellerman asked. 7 years, maybe 8. He moved in not long after I started as super." Trace led them to the elevator, an old industrial freight lift that groaned as it ascended, kept to himself mostly. I would see him coming and going with his camera equipment, but we did not talk much. "Did you notice anything unusual last night?" "No, I live in the basement unit, and I was in by 9 p.m. Did not hear anything." Marcus Harland's apartment was on the 3rd floor, at the end of a hallway with exposed brick walls and industrial lighting. Trace unlocked the door and stepped back. "I will wait out here if you need anything." The apartment was a single large studio space, probably 800 square feet, with high ceilings and tall windows facing the harbor. It had been organized with almost military precision. A kitchenette occupied one corner. A bed was neatly made against the far wall. The main area served as a workspace, dominated by a large desk with 2 computer monitors, a high-end camera setup, and filing cabinets. Maritime photographs covered the walls, ships at dawn, lighthouse beams cutting through fog, harbor workers unloading cargo, weathered fishing boats tied to ancient piers. All were black and white, composed with a careful eye for light and shadow. Singh immediately moved to the computer setup. Kellerman began a methodical search of the physical space. The apartment was remarkably clean, no dishes in the sink, no clutter on surfaces. The filing cabinets were labeled: client work, personal projects, archives, business records. "Computer is password protected," Singh said. "I will need to take it to the lab." Kellerman opened the filing cabinet labeled archives. Inside were folders of photographs organized by year and location. Portland Harbor 2015 through 2019, Coastal Maine 2012 through 2014, Commercial Maritime 2010 through 2019. He pulled out several folders and flipped through them. Professional quality work, nothing obviously suspicious. The personal items were minimal. Clothes hung neatly in a small closet. A single shelf held a handful of books about photography technique and maritime history. On the nightstand sat one framed photograph, the only personal photo visible in the entire apartment. It showed 2 young boys, maybe 8 and 10 years old, standing on a dock with fishing rods. Marcus and his brother, Kellerman guessed. No signs of forced entry, Kellerman said. No signs of a struggle. If he was killed somewhere else and moved here, someone had to transport the body. Or he went willingly to meet someone, Singh said. She was photographing the computer setup, and that someone killed him there. At the loading dock in the middle of the night. Which suggests it was someone he trusted, or someone who convinced him there was a reason to be there. Kellerman looked around the apartment again. Everything about it suggested control and order. A man who lived carefully, who maintained boundaries, who did not invite chaos into his space. What would make a man like that go to a loading dock alone at 1 a.m? They finished processing the apartment and returned to the lobby, where Owen Trace was waiting. Kellerman asked him about building security. "We have cameras at the main entrance and the parking garage," Trace said. "The loading dock does not have coverage. It was considered a low-priority area since we do not use it for deliveries anymore." "I will need the footage from last night," Singh said. "All cameras from 6 p.m. until 6 a.m. "I can get you that. Did Marcus have any visitors recently?" Trace considered. "Not that I noticed. Like I said, he was private. Some of the other tenants are more social, have people coming and going. Marcus was not like that." "Any conflicts with other tenants? Any complaints?" "No, nothing like that." Trace paused. Although Elena Voss mentioned something about noise near the loading dock area a few weeks ago. She complained that someone was moving things around late at night, making scraping sounds. I checked it out, but did not find anything unusual. Elena Voss. Another tenant, Unit 214. She does textile restoration work. Kellerman made a note. "We will need a list of all tenants and their contact information." "I will put that together for you." Derek Harland arrived at the police station at 2 in the afternoon. He was 39 years old, clean-cut, wearing a business suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He worked as a financial advisor at a downtown firm. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed. "I still cannot believe it," Derek said, sitting across from Kellerman in the interview room. "Marcus was careful. He did not take risks. How could this happen?" "That is what we are trying to determine," Kellerman said gently. "When did you last speak with your brother?" 3 days ago, Sunday evening. We talked on the phone for maybe 15 minutes. "What did you discuss?" "Nothing unusual. Work, how he was doing. I asked if he wanted to come to dinner sometime this week. He said he was busy with a project." "Did he mention what project?" "He said it was personal research. Marcus was always working on something. Photography projects, historical research. He was interested in Portland's maritime history." "Did he seem worried about anything, afraid of anyone?" Derek shook his head. "No, he seemed fine, normal. Marcus was not the type to worry anyway. He kept everything internalized." "Tell me about your family situation." Derek's expression tightened slightly. "Our mother died 3 years ago, cancer. After that, Marcus became even more withdrawn. He and our father have been estranged for years. I am the only family Marcus stayed in regular contact with." "Why the estrangement with your father?" "Old family issues, nothing relevant to this." Derek's tone made it clear he did not want to discuss it further. "Where is your father now?" "He lives up the coast, about 40 minutes north, but like I said, they have not spoken in years." Kellerman made notes. "Did Marcus have a romantic relationship, close friends?" "Not that I knew of. Marcus dated occasionally, but nothing serious. He was married once back in his 20s. It did not last. After the divorce, he just focused on his work." "His apartment suggests a very organized person." Would you say he was meticulous? Extremely. Marcus was always like that. Everything had its place. Everything had a schedule. Derek's voice caught. He should have been safe. He lived carefully. After Derek left, Singh appeared in Kellerman's office with a tablet. I pulled the building security footage. You need to see this. The footage showed the main entrance camera view. At 12:47 a.m., Marcus Harland appeared, walking through the lobby toward the rear of the building. He wore the same jacket and jeans they had found on his body. He carried a camera bag over his shoulder. He looked calm, purposeful, not frightened or coerced. He went there voluntarily, Kellerman said. And 8 minutes later, someone else follows. Singh advanced the footage. At 12:55 a.m., a figure in a dark coat and hood entered the frame, moving in the same direction Marcus had gone. The hood obscured their face. Height and build were difficult to determine. Can you enhance this? I am working on it, but the lighting is poor and the resolution is not great. They watched as the hooded figure disappeared toward the back of the building. The footage continued. No one else appeared. At 2:37 a.m., the hooded figure returned, walking briskly through the lobby and out the main entrance. Still no face visible. So our timeline is, Marcus arrives at 12:47, someone follows at 12:55, and that someone leaves at 2:37, Kellerman said. Approximately 90 minutes in between. Which matches Dr. Went's estimated time of death, between midnight and 3 a.m. What about the parking garage camera? Singh pulled up different footage. No vehicles enter or exit during that window. Whoever the hooded figure was, they either walked or parked on the street. Kellerman leaned back, 2 days into the investigation, and they had a victim who went voluntarily to a loading dock in the middle of the night, met someone there, and was killed without a struggle. No obvious motive, no clear suspect, and one strange piece of evidence, a copper washer with a spiral pattern etched into its surface. What about the washer? Kellerman asked. Any analysis back yet? Singh checked her email. Preliminary results. It is copper, approximately 30 to 40 years old based on the patina. The spiral pattern was hand-etched, not machine-made. The numbers 386 are part of a longer serial number, but the rest is worn off. They are running it through databases to see if it matches any known industrial parts. Why leave it there? Signature, calling card, or maybe it fell from the killer and they did not notice. It was between the pallets, not obviously visible. If it fell accidentally, it is a strange coincidence. Singh nodded, unless it means something to the killer, something personal. The December afternoon faded into evening. Street lights flickered on along the waterfront. In the textile mill building, artists worked in their studios, probably unaware of how closely danger had passed them by. In the basement, Owen Trace checked boiler pressure and made notes about a leaking pipe in the east stairwell. On the third floor, Marcus Harland's apartment sat empty and silent, his computer seized as evidence, his photograph staring out at an empty room. Kellerman stood at his office window, looking out at the city. Somewhere in Portland, someone had killed Marcus Harland carefully and deliberately. Someone who knew enough to avoid cameras, to leave minimal evidence, to stage the scene in a way that raised more questions than it answered. And somewhere in Portland, that person was going about their life, believing they had gotten away with it. 8 days passed. The investigation continued, but without significant breakthroughs. The copper washer had been identified as a component from industrial crane equipment, likely from the 1980s. The specific model had been used in maritime shipyards along the eastern seaboard. Beyond that, the trail went cold. Singh was still working on cracking Marcus's computer encryption. The funeral was held on day 6. Derek Harland was the only family member present. Kellerman attended, watching the small gathering of colleagues and acquaintances. No one stood out. No one seemed suspicious. On day 9, Joanna Fisk walked into the Portland Police Department and filed a missing person report. Joanna was 44 years old, professionally dressed, visibly distressed. She owned a small art gallery downtown and had been in a business partnership with Alina Voss for 3 years. Alina had missed a scheduled meeting that morning and was not answering her phone. Her apartment door was locked. Her car was missing. "This is not like her," Joanna said, twisting her hands together. "Elena is meticulous about appointments. She would never just disappear without calling." A patrol unit was dispatched to search for Elena's vehicle. They found it at 4:23 p.m., parked near Fish Point Pier on the eastern edge of the waterfront district. The driver's door was open. Keys were still in the ignition. Elena's purse sat on the passenger seat, wallet intact. Kellerman and Singh arrived as the sun was setting, painting the harbor in shades of orange and purple. The pier stretched out into the water, a narrow wooden structure used primarily by recreational fishermen. At low tide, the water level dropped 10 feet, exposing the pier's support pilings and the rocky shore beneath. It was low tide now. Detective, a patrol officer, pointed down toward the waterline. Kellerman descended the embankment carefully, feet slipping on wet rocks. The smell of salt and seaweed was strong. Beneath the pier, partially obscured by the shadows of the wooden supports, lay a body. Elena Voss was 38 years old. She wore a gray wool coat and dark pants. Her hair floated in the shallow water that still pooled around the rocks. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing. Doctor Wynn arrived as darkness fell. Portable lights were set up, turning the crime scene into a harsh tableau of white light and black shadow. The recovery was complicated by the location and the returning tide. Elena's body was carefully extracted and loaded into the medical examiner's van. Kellerman stood on the pier, looking down at where the body had been. Sarah Valdez was searching the area with her flashlight, photographing every detail. "Detective," her voice carried up from below, "you need to see this." Kellerman descended again. Valdez was crouched near where Elena's body had lain, her flashlight trained on something caught in the fabric of the victim's scarf. A copper washer, hand-stamped spiral pattern, the same greenish patina. Kellerman felt ice in his chest that had nothing to do with the December cold. "Bag it," he said quietly. Singh appeared at his shoulder. She had seen it too. Same killer. "Same killer," Kellerman confirmed. They stood in the cold darkness, listening to the water lap against the rocks, while above them the city went about its evening routines, unaware that 2 murders were now connected by a piece of industrial metal stamped with a spiral that seemed to lead nowhere and everywhere at once. The case had just become something larger. And somewhere in Portland, the killer knew it too. The tactical team escorted Owen Trace down the cabin's narrow steps as the first light of dawn broke through the heavy clouds. Snow had begun to fall in earnest now, thick flakes that clung to the evergreens and muffled the sound of boots on frozen ground. Kellerman watched Trace's face as they guided him toward the transport vehicle. The man's expression held no defiance, no fear, only a terrible, hollow exhaustion. The drive back to Portland took 4 hours through deteriorating weather. Trace sat in silence in the rear compartment, hands cuffed in front of him, staring at nothing. Singh rode in the second vehicle with the tactical unit commander, already on her phone coordinating the processing procedures that would follow. Kellerman drove, his mind turning over the spiral of copper washers they had found arranged on that cabin table. 32 of them, he had counted. The same number of years since the shipyard accident. By the time they arrived at the Portland Police Department headquarters, Captain Hoyle had assembled a full briefing room. The media had somehow learned of the arrest. News vans lined the street outside, cameras tracking the transport vehicle as it pulled into the secure bay. Kellerman felt the familiar weight of closure approaching, but something about Trace's surrender troubled him. It had been too easy, too complete. The interview room was standard configuration. Gray walls, bolted table, observation mirror. Trace sat with his hands folded, waiting. Dr. Patricia, when had cleared him medically. No injuries, no signs of substance influence, fully competent to proceed. Singh set up the recording equipment while Kellerman reviewed his notes one final time. Mr. Trace, Kellerman began, once the formalities were complete, you have waived your right to an attorney. You understand that anything you say will be used in court. I understand, Trace replied. His voice was steady, almost rehearsed. I want to tell you everything. I need to tell you everything. Kellerman exchanged a glance with Singh. They had both seen confessions before, but this felt different. Trace was not seeking a deal. He was seeking something else. Absolution, perhaps, or simply an end. Start with Marcus Harland, Singh said, her tablet ready. How did you know he was investigating the shipyard accident? Trace drew a slow breath. I have been the building superintendent for 16 years. I know everyone who lives there, their routines, their visitors, their business. Marcus was always quiet, kept to himself, but 2 months ago I noticed a change. He started going to the Maritime Museum. He brought home archive boxes, worked late into the night scanning documents. I could hear his printer running at 3 in the morning. You were monitoring him, Kellerman said. Not at first, but I began to pay attention. Then one day I saw him carrying a folder marked with the shipyard company name, the one that closed in 1997. That was when I knew. Knew what? That he had found it, the crane incident, the accident that was not an accident. Trace's hands tightened briefly, then relaxed. I accessed his studio one afternoon when he was out. I have keys to every unit. Building maintenance, you understand. I looked through his files. He had copied maintenance logs, union dispute records, insurance investigation notes. He had my name, the foreman assistant who signed off on the crane inspection 3 days before it failed. Singh leaned forward. Did Marcus confront you? No, he did not know yet that I was the same person. I had a different last name back then, my mother's maiden name. I changed it legally in 2000 when she died and left me a small inheritance. I wanted distance from that life, but Marcus was smart. He was cross-referencing employment records. It was only a matter of time. Kellerman made a note, so you decided to kill him. I decided I could not let it come out. Trace's voice remained calm, clinical. I have built a life here, a quiet life. I am good at my job. The tenants trust me. If the truth came out, everything would collapse. There would be criminal charges for falsifying safety reports, fraud, possibly manslaughter if the injured workers pursued it. I would lose everything, go to prison. I am 55 years old. I would die there. Walk us through the night of December 8th, Singh said. The night Marcus died. Trace nodded slowly. I sent Marcus an email from a false account. I said I was a former shipyard worker who had information about the crane incident. I asked to meet him at the loading dock behind the building at 1:30 in the morning. I chose that time because the artist tenants are usually asleep by then, and the loading dock is not visible from the street. Marcus replied that he would be there. And he came. He was wearing a heavy coat, carrying a notebook. He looked excited. He thought he was about to break open his investigation. I was waiting in the shadows near the dumpster enclosure. When he walked past, I came up behind him. I used a hold I learned in the Navy, rear naked choke. It cuts off blood flow to the brain. He lost consciousness in about 12 seconds. I held it for another minute to be certain. The room was silent except for the hum of the recording equipment. Singh's stylus had stopped moving on her tablet. Kellerman kept his expression neutral, professional, but he felt a cold anger building in his chest. There was no struggle, Trace continued. He did not suffer. That was important to me. I did not want him to suffer. I lowered him to the ground and arranged him so he would be found quickly. I did not want animals to get to him. Then I placed the copper washer near his hand. Why the washer? Kellerman asked. Trace looked down at his folded hands. It was the component I loosened, the main coupling on the crane assembly. I was 25 years old and the shift supervisor told me to do it. He said the company needed an incident to discredit the union's safety complaints. He said it would be minor, maybe some equipment damage, nothing serious. He gave me $5,000 in cash and told me to take a wrench to the washer bolts during the night shift when no one was watching. I did it. I was young and stupid and I needed the money. My mother was sick. I thought $5,000 was a fortune. But the incident was not minor, Singh said quietly. No, the crane collapsed during a heavy lift the next morning. 3 men were injured. Graham Pelletier's back was crushed. Ray Costa broke his leg in 2 places. Thomas Wade suffered a concussion. They could have died. I have lived with that knowledge every single day since. The company paid them settlements and made them sign non-disclosure agreements. The shift supervisor died of a heart attack in 2003. I thought it was over. I thought I had escaped. Kellerman leaned back in his chair, but Marcus was going to expose it. Well, yes. What about Elena Voss? Trace's expression shifted slightly. Something close to regret flickered across his face. Elena was collateral damage. I did not know she was investigating the same incident until it was too late. She was conducting an oral history project about shipyard workers. She had interviewed Graham Pelletier, Thomas Wade, even my father's old supervisor. She kept meticulous notes. After Marcus died, I checked her studio as well. I found her files. She had not connected me yet, but she had the same records Marcus did. She was going to interview Vincent Harlan the following week. Vincent would have told her about the foreman's assistant named Owen. She would have found me. And so you killed her too. I waited 9 days. I wanted it to seem unrelated. I sent her a message saying I was a shipyard family member with photographs she might want for her project. I asked her to meet me at Fish Point Pier at dusk. She came alone. I used the same method. It was quick. I put her body in my truck and waited until after dark to place her in the water beneath the pier. I knew the tide would carry her out, but I also knew she would be found. I wanted her to be found. I am not a monster. Singh's voice was hard now. You murdered 2 innocent people. I know what I am, Trace said. I am a coward who made a terrible choice 30 years ago and compounded it with 2 more terrible choices. I am not asking for understanding. I am giving you the truth. Kellerman slid a photograph across the table. This is the copper washer we found at Marcus Harlan's scene. You said you placed it deliberately. Yes, it is from the original crane. After the accident, the crane was decommissioned. The company sold the parts for scrap. I kept a box of the washers. I do not know why. Guilt, maybe. A need to remember. When I decided to kill Marcus, I knew I had to leave one. It was the only way the act made sense to me. A signature, an admission. You wanted to be caught, Singh said. I wanted it to be over, but I was not ready to turn myself in. Not yet. I thought if I left the washers, eventually someone would connect them to the shipyard and the investigation would follow a path that did not lead directly to me. But you were faster than I expected. Detective Singh's digital forensics work was impressive. Once you found my online activity, I knew the time had come. Kellerman consulted his notes. The cabin in Aroostook County. Why did you go there? I needed time to think, to decide what to do. I knew you would find me eventually, but I wanted a few days alone. I arranged the washers on a table, 32 of them, 1 for each year I have carried this. I was going to call you this morning. I was going to tell you where I was, but you arrived first. The interview continued for another 3 hours. Trace provided details about his movements on both nights, his disposal of evidence, his covering of digital tracks. He described how he had used his superintendent access to disable specific security cameras temporarily, how he had worn gloves and disposed of his clothing in a commercial dumpster 15 miles away. He confirmed that he had sent the anonymous warning messages to building tenants, hoping to create enough fear that people would stop talking to investigators. By the time they finished, it was late afternoon. The snow had stopped, leaving the city blanketed in white. Kellerman and Singh stepped out of the interview room and stood in the hallway, both of them silent for a long moment. "That was the most methodical confession I have ever heard," Singh said finally. "He has been rehearsing it for 30 years, Kellerman replied. Every word was planned. Captain Hoyle appeared at the end of the hallway. "The DA wants a briefing in 20 minutes. The media is demanding a statement. Are we confident in the confession?" "It is airtight," Kellerman said. "He gave us everything. Motive, method, timeline, evidence disposal. We can corroborate all of it. Then we move forward with charges. First-degree murder, 2 counts. This one is going to trial fast." But Kellerman knew it would not go to trial. Trace would plead guilty. He wanted this finished as much as anyone. Over the next week, the investigation moved into its closing phase. Forensic teams processed Trace's apartment thoroughly, confirming every detail of his confession. The box of copper washers was inventoried, 32 remaining plus the 2 left at crime scene. Singh traced his online activity back 6 months, documenting his monitoring of both Marcus Harland and Alina Voss. She found search histories for remote properties, asphyxiation techniques, body disposal methods. All of it methodical, all of it planned. Graham Pelletier was interviewed again. When told about Trace's confession, the old man wept. "I knew it was sabotage," he said. "I knew it for 30 years and no one would listen. Now 2 more people are dead because of it." Thomas Wade, reached by phone in Vermont, was quieter. "I took the settlement money and convinced myself the company's story was true," he said. "It was easier that way. I am sorry I did not speak up." Ray Costa, fully cleared, issued a statement through his attorney expressing sympathy for the victims' families. He declined further interviews. Derek Harlan struggled with his brother's death in a new way now, knowing that Marcus had been killed for asking questions Derek himself had discouraged. "I told him to let it go," Derek said during a follow-up interview. "I told him the past did not matter, but it did matter. It mattered to those workers. It should have mattered to me." Vincent Harland withdrew further into isolation. He gave one brief statement acknowledging his employment at the shipyard and his presence during the accident, but he refused to discuss his feelings about his son's murder. Kellerman left his card. Vincent never called. Joanna Fisk closed her gallery for 2 weeks. When she reopened, she dedicated the space to Elena's textile restoration work. She was trying to preserve history, Joanna told a reporter. She was trying to give voice to people whose stories were erased. That work will continue. Lily Chen, the artist who had reported seeing a figure in a dark coat, moved out of the textile mill building. Several other tenants followed. The building's owner hired a new superintendent and installed upgraded security systems, but the space never felt the same. The media coverage was intense but brief. By mid-January, the story had cycled out of the headlines, replaced by newer tragedies. Kellerman attended both funerals. Marcus Harlan's was small, attended mostly by photography colleagues and a few distant relatives. Alina Voss's drew a larger crowd, including many of the shipyard workers and their families she had interviewed for her oral history project. Owen Trace was arraigned in late January. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder. No trial was necessary. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for March. On a cold afternoon in early February, Kellerman and Singh sat in Kellerman's office reviewing the final case documentation. The file was massive now, every detail cataloged, every timeline verified. They had done good work. 2 murders solved, a killer in custody, justice on its way. But Kellerman felt no satisfaction. "What are you thinking?" Singh asked. "I am thinking about 32 years, Kellerman said. 32 years between the crime and the consequences. 3 men injured, their lives damaged, and no one held accountable. If that shift supervisor had lived, if the company had been prosecuted, maybe Marcus and Alina would still be alive." You cannot think that way. I know, but I do. Singh closed her laptop. Trace said something during the confession that stayed with me. He said he was not a monster, but what makes someone a monster? One bad choice at 25 made under pressure, or the two murders committed 30 years later to cover it up. Both, Kellerman said, and neither. He was a coward who made cowardly choices and called them necessity. That is all. The sentencing hearing in March lasted 2 hours. The families of Marcus Harland and Alina Voss gave victim impact statements. Derek Harland spoke briefly, his voice cracking. Joanna Fisk read a letter Alina had written about the importance of historical memory. Graham Pelletier, brought in by wheelchair, described the decades of pain caused by an injury that should never have happened. Owen Trace, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, listened without expression. When given the opportunity to speak, he stood and faced the families. I have no words that will ease your pain, he said. I have no justification that will make sense of what I did. I killed 2 good people who were trying to bring truth to light. I did it to protect myself from consequences I deserved to face. I was a coward in 1989, and I remained a coward until the moment of my arrest. I am sorry. I know that means nothing, but I am sorry. The judge sentenced him to 2 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. As Trace was led away, Kellerman watched the families file out of the courtroom. Some looked relieved, others looked hollow. Justice had been served, but justice could not bring back the dead. Outside, the March wind was cold and sharp. Singh pulled her coat tighter as they walked to the car. Are you all right? She asked. I will be, Kellerman said. This job does not allow for all right. It allows for finished. And this one is finished. They drove back to the station in silence. The case file would be archived, the evidence stored, the copper washers tagged and sealed in a property room where they would sit for decades, or until someone decided they could finally be destroyed. That evening, alone in his apartment, Kellerman thought about the spiral pattern Trace had arranged on that cabin table. 32 washers in a perfect inward curve, tightening toward a center point that represented nothing. No meaning, no redemption, just the end point of a long fall. He thought about Marcus Harland, who had wanted to uncover the truth about an accident that injured 3 workers and exposed corporate negligence. He thought about Alina Voss, who had wanted to preserve the stories of working people whose voices had been silenced by non-disclosure agreements and hush money. Both of them had died for asking questions. And Owen Trace, who had loosened 4 bolts on a crane coupling 32 years ago for $5,000, would spend the rest of his life in a cell, the spiral finally complete. Kellerman poured himself a small glass of whiskey and stood at his window, watching the lights of Portland flicker in the darkness. Snow was forecast for tomorrow. The city would wake up white again, clean on the surface, everything buried underneath. The case was closed, the file was complete, but the cost of that closure, 2 lives, 3 injured workers, decades of silence, would never be fully accounted for. He finished his whiskey and went to bed. Tomorrow there would be new cases, new crimes, new spirals to untangle. The work continued. It always continued. But tonight, for just a few hours, Detective Bryce Kellerman allowed himself to feel the weight of what had been lost and what could never be recovered. The rain continued outside, steady and cold, washing the streets clean for another day.